1914, First Pres officially spun off a new church called Hyde Park Presbyterian. It had 26 charter members, but 148 members in regular attendance. The Reverend J.R.C. Brown was called as the first pastor. In 1917, the congregation moved into a new yellow brick building on Swan Avenue, built for $12,000, funded by a tithing campaign. In 1922, Dr. Hardin Branch was called as a pastor and was considered to be a man's man and immediately attracted a huge following. By 1923, the men's Barnabas class started and had 101 members by 1927, rarely dropping below 50 over the next 3 decades. In 1931, Nina Thomas, the one whose quote you just heard, became the first director of Christian education. And in short order, the Intermediate Christian Endeavor Society was formed, made up of young adults, the high school, and the junior high. In 1933, the first annual Vacation Bible School was held, and by the next year, 1934, had 125 children. There was a Boy Scout troop here, Troop 23, and it lasted well into the 21st century, except for a brief banishment after an incident in 1933, apparently after an energetic gathering when the windows and doors of the men's building and also the furniture were wrecked. No one's allowed to come back for a while. One of the troop's highlights, however, was the induction in 1932 of the teary-eyed Bambino, Babe Ruth, in the twilight of his career, was made a member of Troop 23. One of my favorite Boy Scout stories from that period. After a camping trip to Bartow, the Scouts' truck broke down, so they slept in the first building outside where the cabin was later located. Some of the church members didn't like it because they slept on church property. But Dr. Branch stood up here and said, well, I don't know why they complained. We've got people that go to church in this go to sleep in this church every Sunday. So under Dr. Branch, the church grew quickly, and by 1934, new buildings had been erected for the primary department, the Barnabas class, Christian Endeavor, and a log cabin. Oh, we're on the Bambino, sorry. There's the log cabin, built by the young people themselves. Now, during the Florida boom in the 20s, many churches grew and built new churches. But as good Presbyterians, Hyde Park just kept adding buildings until it was said by passersby to resemble a motor court. Now, the Christian Endeavor class, which started as that youthful Christian Endeavor group, they grew older and they stayed together as a Sunday school class. They later became known as the co-ed class, then as the Lenfesti class, was my grandfather taught them, and finally as the Friendly class, all in their 70s and 80s, still together as a Sunday school class. The first really difficult setback came when the popular Dr. Branch had a stroke right in the pulpit, hands clutching the sides of the pulpit as he simply stopped altogether and then collapsed right in the pulpit. He didn't die that day, but he soon did. The next setback came in 1936 when the foundations of the choir loft were found to have weakened, and with repairs to the choir loft arch so necessary that the arch, roof, and west wall of the church would have fallen in had not the arch been supported immediately. The entire interior, and I knew I shouldn't have been working on this at 2 in the morning. There's Dr. Branch. All right, here we go. The entire interior of the audience room was redecorated. This is not our church, by the way, but it's probably a lot what it looked like. And the old gas stoves were replaced by circulating air coal stoves, which made the audience room much warmer and comfortable in cold weather, but which required 1.5 tons of coal to provide enough heat for all of the buildings each winter. During the Depression years, costs for even the barest essentials were weighed. For example, after much discussion, the deacons voted in 1937 it would be impossible to purchase a typewriter that year. But they finally voted to go ahead with it in 1938 and bought the typewriter for $40. But they had to pave Swan Avenue in front of the church that year because it wasn't yet the city's responsibility. So you can see they had dirt streets before, and here came the streetcar, but that made it noisier now that it was paved. So a new vestibule was considered to lessen the noise made by the streetcars in front of the church on Sunday morning. But that expense was avoided after a committee went forth to confer with Tampa Electric. Eventually, the word came back that the streetcar operators would try to be quieter, at least in front of the church. In 1940, the deacons proposed that Miss Flora White's $1,000 legacy be used to pay off the church's $2,500 mortgage, then refunded it back into the church coffers at $550 a month for future use as a whole. The legacy thus did double duty. Dr. Ryan Wood came in 1941, but left pretty quickly to go to war. He was replaced by the supply pastor, Rutherford Douglass. Now, I don't have a picture of Rutherford Douglass, but he was known to the ladies as not kindly, as the Kentucky gentleman, the ladies who still remembered him when I did the interviews with them 50 years later. He arrived in December of 1941, apparently misinterpreting his mission during several calls on ladies of the congregation. After he was greeted at the door with a baseball bat by one of them, he was subsequently run out of town on the evening train by a delegation of elders in 1942. I will tell you, the one person who was really irritated by this was my grandmother, because all of her friends said he did not hit on her. She felt very left out. So this was the year that the first Sunday school barbecue was held out at the Lenfesties Lake Place on White Trout Lake. A tradition begun that year, which was to last, I can't slow down or we won't be out of here till 3. I just got this to slow down. Can y'all understand me if I keep speeding along? Okay, you'll be sorry. You got the story about poor Rutherford Douglass, right? Yes, who hit on the ladies. All right. This was the year that the first Sunday school picnic was held out at the Lenfesties Lake Place on White Trout Lake. A tradition begun that year, which was to last over 30 years. Surrounded by the palmettos, pines, orange groves, kumquat trees, and dove fields that later would become the first phase of Carrollwood, families of the church met for an afternoon and evening of swimming in the bottomless, muddy lake of White Trout Lake. They played shuffleboard, had fellowship, very long blessing, and heavenly food cooked all day by a couple of sturdy souls who had been up in the pre-dawn hours starting the fire, burning down the coals and basting the pork all day, reinforced by many ladies bringing carloads of potato salad, string beans, fried chicken. Many pounds of pork and beef cooked slowly through the day as the two chefs slouched in their lawn chairs, philosophizing and generally making high-minded comments. The recipe for the sauce depended on who was in charge of making it. Mr. Lenfesty, my father's, sauce can be found under Pit Barbecue in the Gasparilla cookbook. It is not on Harriet's Florida Kitchen. There were also picnics at beach houses with the traditional potato salad. Yes, I thought I had a beach, okay. With the traditional potato salad, fried fish, and watermelons. You bought the watermelons at the Ice House in Largo for 25 cents, and for a dime, you got 25 pounds of ice for the lemonade. Even after the war caused gasoline to be rationed, the picnics survived. In other news that year, 1941, the manse, the former Olivet Chapel on Inman, was sold for $2,750. The current valuation on Zillow is $1.5 million. And I know every time my grandfather hears something like that, he rolls in his grave to think that they didn't go ahead and wait to sell it this year. Dr. Heltzel, do I have Dr. Heltzel? Let's see. Yes. Dr. Heltzel came from 1943 to 1945. He had a little trouble getting up in the morning and often had to be called several times before church, but he was a wonderful sermonizer and became nationally known and published. He's the one who requested $125 a month for a trained secretary for the first time, and he got her. Dr. Edward S. Campbell was called as a pastor in 1946 and remained until his retirement in 1960. A group of 12 young people were chosen to serve as junior deacons, and at Dr. Campbell's suggestion, a paid worker was found for the nursery during church, first time. The war ended, and a second new church was planned and started. In 1953, the new and almost completely air-conditioned brick Georgian church was completed. The stained glass windows from the old church were moved into the new building. But it wasn't completely air-conditioned, notably in the stairwell leading up to the fellowship hall. The architect was Franklin Adams, and as long queues of sweltering wedding guests or church members snaked up the unair-conditioned stairwell, Lola Ann Fries suggested that Mr. Adams should be tied to the banister for these occasions. When the church was completed, a mortgage of $75,000 was secured and 30 advanced monthly payments were made through the POM Club, Pay Off the Mortgage, established among church members. The session created the slogan, "The more interest we have, the more interest we save." In 1955, the session decided the loan should be paid off within a 5-year period, with a consensus that the campaign would include air conditioning of the Sunday school building. And how happy we are about that. Dr. Campbell had initiated junior church, whereby everyone under a certain age sat in a group up front under his eagle eye during the regular Sunday school service. Of course, then as now, all of the children came to church prepared with their offerings, both for Sunday school and for church. Most children brought 2 coins to be evenly distributed, but later in the 50s, all of Mary Lib Anderson's friends, Mary Lib circled, Linda and I are on the front row in the center, and Patricia, so we're the middle 3. I'm in the white, Linda's in the dark dress, and Patricia's next to Linda. Anyway, all of Mary Lib's friends would furtively watch with admiration as she whisked a single quarter out of her small purse, deposited it in the Sunday school offering basket, and made change in preparation for going to junior church later. It was at this time that the church decided to take over the entire support of Vivian Hodges in the missionary field and supported her well into old age. We had her photograph as basically a 22-year-old in our Sunday school class for years and years and years. We almost had a heart attack when she arrived and she was 60. She just didn't look like that photograph. In 1958, when Dr. Campbell retired, we had built up to 904 members with 500 attending Sunday school, and the elders set a goal for all income to be divided 50-50 between current expenses and benevolences. Plans began to enlarge the 9-year-old educational building. In June of that year, the manse on South Dakota was sold and a new one purchased on South Orleans. Ewell Stanford, who also played the organ at the Tampa Theater, going down underneath the stage, was hired for 30 days. Dr. Campbell retired. In an uncharacteristically short time of 6 months, a new preacher was found, the Reverend Archie McKee and his family of 6. Archie started our Christmas candlelight service, informal Christmas morning service, and the German tradition of the lighting of the Advent wreath, thanks to one of their many exchange students. We also had 4 choirs. Bill Luca was the director of the adult chancel choir, and Mrs. Donald Orr, Rebecca, was responsible for the Westminster Choir, junior and senior high age, and the youth choir, 4th grade to junior high, and the Cherub Choir, 1st through 3rd grades. In the early 60s, 2 houses on Willow were purchased, and we began planning to expand the church to the east. Archie served from 1961 to 1975 and arrived just in time for the turbulent 60s. In July of 1963, the session went on record that all worshipers, including Negroes, be seated in discretion in a manner conducive to worship. For the first time, changes were made in the Book of Church Order approving the ordination of women as officers and ministers in our church. The Castro takeover in Cuba also changed the nature of the community of Ybor City and mission work. The many Cuban refugees and diminishing cigar industry resulted in extensive unemployment among the cigar workers. The times and movements were increasingly divisive, often threatening to drive deep wedges of mistrust and misunderstanding through our congregation as it did in all churches across the land. Pressure increased through the 60s as the church struggled to maintain its balance between social and political action and its mission to preach a gospel of moral and spiritual regeneration. There was conflict in our church, as in many, regarding the use of civil disobedience, particularly around the same month when Martin Luther King addressed the General Assembly in August. The question of civil disobedience as a tool for change raged on through the decade. Despite the popularity of Archie McKee and the growth of the church, some people left our church during the civil rights years, calling Dr. McKee a communist, partially because of a youth program that he started. In 1968, the session sold the old manse at 805 South Orleans for $20,000, and the experimental coffee house ministry, the Unicorn, opened in the house on Willow, inviting our own youth and others around the neighborhood to come in and hang out. You can see from this attractive crowd why it did not last long. In the 60s were when Linda Waters and I were teenagers and active in our very lively youth fellowship. Missy Green's mother remembered years later, for some reason or other, this is not our group actually, this is just a good one to describe the story. For some reason or other, this youth group had a fetish about water balloons and shaving cream. Obviously, it carried through the years. So before leaving home, she told Missy, "Don't you dare get involved with water balloons and shaving cream." Well, she said, when I got out there, the first thing I heard was that Missy had been involved with the water balloons and the shaving cream. What killed it, though, she said, was Archie decided, this is Dr. McKee, that the next time they would start off right away with a lot of water balloons and shaving cream battles, and that forced a water balloon fight, and everybody joined in, and that was the end of that. In the shaving cream picture. Did everybody hear this? Okay, perhaps we should have the two standing elders who were here in shaving cream stand up. That's hysterical. Okay. One Sunday night at one of the suppers, these are just miscellaneous. This is Missy here with her big mouth over here on the left. One Sunday night at one of the suppers, one of the high school children wrote on a paper plate, "Help, I'm being held captive," and threw it in the garbage. And the next morning, the police came. It had been found and reported, so they had to search the building to see who was being held captive. The perpetrator was never revealed. That's part of our group, too. Okay. In 1970 came a major addition to the educational building. The frame structure, which had originally been built to house the Barnabas men's class, was demolished. That's there on the right-hand side. And a new two-story brick annex built to complete the building to the alley. Most of the area in question was a weedy yard with a few old swing sets. So to tell you where it is, if you look, in this picture, we're basically standing in the door of the chapel, and between the ends of the two buildings where that car is, that's pretty much where our double doors are. Just to give you an idea of the whole area was filled in to create what we know today. The kitchen was remodeled, the corner gas station and Willow Avenue house torn down, along with the Unicorn Coffee House ministry, and in their place were a playground and a parking lot east of the existing building. In 1975, Archie McKee departed, and Pastor Jerry Voy, here in the middle, took over during the 3-year search for a new preacher. But even and that's, by the way, that's Rebecca Orr on the right-hand side. But even as he departed for another church, in 1977, our new organist, Bonnie Gregory, was the only staff member remaining. No one there on her first Sunday will ever forget her entrance. Our new organist, now we did not have our window then, we had a door that went through to the choir room. Our new organist stepped through the central door in the rear of the choir loft, tripped on her robe, and tumbled down the steps to the organ in full view of the entire congregation. It's a big day. But even exciting events like that didn't keep our numbers up, and there was a severe attendance slump as interim ministers came and went for the next 3 years. But in 1978, I'm sorry, that's sideways. Just turn your head like that. Mike Carson arrived, and the congregation numbers took off again. He was enormously popular, and our membership had reached 600 by 1981, with the vast majority under 40 years old. Hyde Park had various mission and ministries with such widely diverse groups as AA, Al-Anon, Big Brothers, Young Life, Drug Abuse Counseling Program, and the Rainbow Center for Abused Children, which served over 1,000 families in the 15 years it was based here. The fellowship hall was used by a small Korean congregation for office space and their services. The 2 cents a meal hunger project was started. Aerobics classes were offered in the fellowship hall, which when it wasn't being used by the Korean church. This particular form, there we go. This particular form of exercise sat more comfortably with the session, who were a little concerned a few years earlier with the yoga classes because they thought we would all be influenced by Eastern religions, when it was made clear to them that the class was run by the YMCA just for exercise rather than its philosophical implications. The entire pulpit and choir of the sanctuary, which had looked like this, were remodeled and carpeted, and possibly because we now had a snazzy new office renovation, Marian Anderson, seen here on the right, came as our new church secretary in April of 1980. But in 1982, we had another potential setback. About a week, this is not the choir that was there then. About a week before Palm Sunday, longtime music director Rebecca Orr suddenly resigned, taking most of the choir with her, all in one day, leaving a virtually empty choir loft for the upcoming Palm Sunday service at Hyde Park. But Pastor Mike Carson quickly placed a number of phone calls to recruit church members who had never before been in a choir loft to sing on Palm Sunday. As Dave Lurson said, quite a few of us were sure this would be our only invitation to sing in public. So we responded with an enthusiastic yes and showed up for rehearsals conducted by the newly promoted choir director, Bonnie Gregory. The bodybuilders class, meaning building the body of Christ, started for the young to mid-marrieds with children. They had brunches, renaissances on the Bayshore, beach parties, picnics, dinners at various restaurants, and got involved with Ruskin Ministries and the Rainbow Family Center. The young adults had a similar social group, now called the Mingles. One of the most beloved aspects of this period was the beginning of family weekends at Cedar Kirk. Entire families bonded and became lifelong friends as they crashed canoes into each other, swung over the river, square danced, played board games together. Jordan Tanner and Stacy Crum said those were some of their favorite memories, though Stacy said she had some memory of the Tanner family being particularly prone to dumping in the canoes. In 1981, with difficulty, the relationship between Dr. Carson and Hyde Park was dissolved for various reasons, and those not dissimilar from reasons earlier ministers had been invited to depart. Feelings ran strong, but even people who had been on the search committee knew this separation was inevitable. Once again, there was a severe attendance slump during this time, when there was a real fear that the Hyde Park Presbyterian Church would curl up its toes right here on Swan Avenue. The congregation was traumatized by the loss of such a popular and beloved minister, but valiant interim preacher Roger Sillers remained and ministered to our wounded souls through the 3-year period of this next preacher search. Finally, Ken Schick was being shown around the church by Bill Sandman, even before he was called. As they neared the preacher's office, he said, "And this would be your office." And he threw open the door, and there on the pastor's couch lay a dark figure of a woman sleeping. One flick of the light switch, and the woman popped up in a daze and said, "Oh, hello." It was Bonnie, our church organist. Bill said, "This is our new pastor." And Bonnie explained she was just resting before a Berkeley event that night. They excused themselves, turned off the light, and she went back to finishing her nap. Finally, the Schicks arrived, to our great delight. In the fall of 1985, the session adopted a 15-year plan for Hyde Park Presbyterian growth through the year 2000 called Vision Decision, with a goal of 50% to benevolences, from 25% where it was then. But in 1987, oh, there was Bonnie, that's from the sleeping picture. In 1987, the congregation was rocked by a small fire and then a catastrophic one. The church fellowship hall caught fire and quickly spread to the Sunday school rooms. The fire department responded quickly, but in minutes, the upstairs was engulfed in flames. Upstairs damage report was $375,000 total in damage. Major water damage to the first floor, heavy fire and smoke damage to the second story, but absolutely no damage to the sanctuary. In the first service after the fire, the sanctuary was packed, despite makeshift electricity and air conditioning. Many members pitched in to help clean up, organize the insurance claim, and work to rebuild the church. Sunday school classes were dispersed to the church's outbuildings on Willow and Orleans, Old Hyde Park Village's offices, Dr. Bob Henderson's office across the street, the Halsema's house 2 blocks away on Willow. The church office moved to the Willow House. In April 1989, the new 7,000 square foot addition, complete with chapel, was dedicated. The post-fire reconstruction, new building, and refurbishments had come in within budget and largely on time for a total of approximately $918,000. The Vision Decision Capital Campaign had raised $200,000 in pledges, which together with insurance covered the costs. To save money, the landscaping was completed all by volunteers, all working one Saturday in April, replanting sod, beds, parking lot, and the works. In 1988, the Northern and Southern Presbyterian Union occurred. I couldn't find a slide that would show this, so you just live with this one. For the first time since the Civil War, Hyde Park, this is one of the most important things in this speech, Hyde Park opted ownership of its own property as a condition of agreeing to the Union. Interestingly, at the time of the Union, there were 5 million members nationwide. By 30 years later, that number had dropped to 75%, well under 2.5 million. Hyde Park engaged in a number of ministries over the next 25 years, mission trips and events, a second Festival of Faith, Mother's Morning Out, Hurricane Relief Fund, a Russian church in Vladimir, a leprosy project in Yucatan, Jamaica outreach, women's retreats, lots of them, great pajamas. And the session dealt with buying vans, air conditioners, AIDS issues, same-sex marriages, pornography and movies, contemporary services, and of course, managed the ever-present bees in the columns. Our church funded projects in Haiti, Russia, Ukraine, Africa, and Mexico. The members of our church helped build houses for Habitat for Humanity. We provided human resources as well as money for projects in Haiti, the Ukraine, and Africa. In 1989, Associate Pastor Watt Custer commandeered Ensley and Peggy Shield to start a new ministry for senior citizens called Primetimers, and Ensley was appointed temporary chairman. They had a bazillion amazing parties and brunches, including one where everybody got to hug an alligator, and 25 years later, Ensley was still the temporary chairman. Commenting in the Presbyterian Church, you never escape a job. And apparently there was a day when the Primetimers were busted, because here's the chief of police. John Brannon, that year John Brannon is the name of the slide. That year, a diligent and musically knowledgeable organ committee visited numerous churches throughout Florida, finally decided on an electronic organ, which they all agreed, to their surprise, sounded like a traditional one. Treasurer John Brannon said, "I don't remember much about what it sounded like, but the cost was 20% of the cost of a traditional organ. $200,000 instead of $1 million. In fact, the minutes recorded it only cost $100,000. John was very pleased. In 1990, the sanctuary roof was redone, and the bees were found again in one of the church pillars. So the building committee proposed restoring the columns in fiberglass after a sort of bee condo was attached to remove the bees. Other favorite memories from this time included talent shows, including some very interesting costumes. There's our preacher and his beloved wife. And particularly well remembered was John and Tony Brannon's act called A Day in the Life of a Colorectal Surgeon, which all present agreed was hysterical. One of them was the hands and one of them was the feet, and they ate their morning cereal. The youth group went on what seemed like endless numbers of trips, notably to Merida, which was considered to be the best mission trip ever, and the next year to West Virginia, now famous for being the worst mission trip ever, not improved by Janie Gonzalez being stung by a bee and blowing up like a Cabbage Patch doll. There was a memorable hiking trip to Colorado, all still remembered when I interviewed them by Stacy Crum, Tony Brannon, and Walker Tanner. Annie Shippard may remember the Great Escape to King's College in Bristol, Tennessee. And on another occasion, Chris Tanner was shepherding the middle school group in the church van and managed to shave the roof off in the Hyde Park Village parking lot. The youth group had to earn the money to fix the van, and a new church van driver policy was established.
This history's way too thorough.
And you're going to have to pay to get out of the church. Okay, so Meaningful to today's session, in 1997, we were faced with the imminent failure of the air conditioning system, not to mention roof repairs. So another capital campaign initiative called the Vision Decision Capital Campaign was started, with the decision made to hire a consultant with a starting goal of $688,748. I don't know why it's quite so specific. With the anticipation that the church could grow to such an extent, the choir might have 400 people. No one wanted the church to become that big, but Vision Decision raised $1 million because they were given a cornerstone gift towards the capital campaign, a block of bank stock sold at $299,000. By mid-2000, $1,168,000 had been pledged, exceeding the $1 million goal, and by the end of 2003, over $1 million had been received in hand. 10% of that was committed to mission and ministries. However, by the end of the year, the annual operating budget was $61,000 in the hole, undoubtedly because most felt they had already given their share during the capital campaign. The capital campaign paid for just under $1 million worth of renovations: the new organ, the grand piano, new chairs and cushions, the kitchen and office, downlighting in the sanctuary, chandeliers, theatrical lighting to highlight the system, to highlight the pulpit, a sound system, and they paid off the Willow Avenue debt. Now, Mrs. Thomas's house on Willow was sold for $90,000. It is now valued at $1.3 million, of course, and the new chapel was created in her name. And right before it was sold, bees were found in the house. John Brennan said, in retrospect, we should have kept the house and sold the honey. That's just another picture of John, just in case you forget who's making these pithy comments. 2000 was when the contemporary service started, and at first held in the sanctuary with the hope of appealing to a younger audience and non-traditional worshipers. Eventually, it moved upstairs so people could drink coffee during the service. What no one expected or possibly anticipated was the segmenting and disassociation of parts of our congregation. There was more discussion about the size and growth of the church. One faction wanted the church to be big time, maybe build a gym upstairs. Another group wanted to keep the church smaller, a church where everyone knew everybody. Teams were assigned to go out and look at other contemporary services. Meanwhile, in 2001, another property on Willow was purchased for $140,000. Dr. Schick went on a 6-month sabbatical in 2004 and then came back early. To give you a snapshot of the church, 662 members, 300 average attendance, budget surplus. There were 3 services. For a while, one was a blended service, then back to 2, but at different times in the sanctuary, with Sunday school in between. The contemporary went back to the sanctuary, then it went back to the fellowship hall. We started the Grand Sweep year-long Bible study Sunday school curriculum. All classes, adults and children, spent 1 whole year working their way through the entire Bible. A set of benchmarks and guidelines was established for children and youth. They memorized traditional hymns and children's songs, books of the Bible, scripture verses, 10 Commandments, Lord's Prayer, Apostles' Creed, 23rd Psalm, and began mastery of using the Bible. They memorized all of those things that I just named. And this group was very into it, as you can see. This was the junior high school group. They were very lively. By now, Bonnie Gregory had been there for 30 years. Naomi Anders ran the E-Chimes and eventually became assistant to the pastor. Marie Warner in 2008 retired as church secretary. I'm sorry, that's not larger. Kathy Bauman rolled on. In October of 2008, the banking credit crunch or meltdown was just beginning to roll. But in 2009, despite a lean year, all committees were still on budget, and a stewardship goal of $630,000 was set, aiming for 100% participation. The number of active church members stood at 556 at the beginning of January, with average church attendance at 225, with the largest numbers in the combined 25 to 55 group. Steve Tanner and Isabel Adams on the Fellowship and Recreation Committee worked on ways to grow the number of fellowship groups, which was long one of the greatest sources of our spiritual reinforcement. For from, I've lost my place. The members of Hyde Park, all right. That can't be right. Wait, where am I? Sorry, y'all. Okay, there's Carl. That's good. Okay. The Crave. Nope. Let me just switch over to this. Hold on. The name of the contemporary service was changed to Crave. Amazingly, the church ended the year with a $10,000 surplus in operating funds. Salaries weren't increased, and expenditures remained lean, but Treasurer John Brannon, with the help of a calm, fiscally responsible, and dedicated session, kept the monetary ship on an even keel. Yet, despite solid membership, leadership, between 2011 and 2014, the number of active members dropped from 371 to 327, with average attendance from 200 down to 140. Remember that the session in the fall of 1985 had passed a 15-year growth plan with a goal of increasing expenditures for benevolences from about 25% to 50%. In fact, by 2014, the ratio of expenditures for mission and ministry had dropped below 10% of budget, with expenditures for personnel, property, and administration taking up 89% of the expenditures. So, member activities ramped up, with various members hosting and planning events. Ann and Bruce Arand hosted a movie night. Josh Crum, a softball team. They won their first game. John Brannon, a round-robin tennis tournament. Terry Kirkendall and Guy Bryant, a golf tournament. Kelly Bureau and Kim Brannon, bike outings. And now it was time to celebrate our first 100 years. Back to Jane. Yeah, okay. Jane, the centennial celebration was held and organized by Jane Brannon and her incredible committee, who cooked all of the chicken tetrazzini at home, enough for about 1 million people, pre-bagged countless Ziploc bags of lettuce, and brought them all to the church to assemble in our kitchen. Many people managed to put together period costumes for the occasion. Wait. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, there we go. Naomi and Andy, that's what I'm looking for. Many people managed to put together period costumes for the occasion, some astoundingly authentic. Grand parties were held, and Jet Tanner gave a rousing account of family outings and overnights out at Cedar Kirk. The Schicks departed with much love and fanfare. From 2014 to 2017, a search for a new preacher began again, although we gained yet another interim preacher, our wonderful Jenny. As if things weren't wobbly enough, our beloved choir director, Bonnie Gregory, died unexpectedly in 2015, shocking the entire church. But to our great delight, the Reverend James Friesen and his family arrived in 2017. Our new nationally renowned choir and music director arrived, but before the end of the year, our new nationally renowned choir and music director had departed, about 2 days before Palm Sunday, just like when Mrs. Orr left. But the bell choir and the choir performed beautifully and held it together until 2019, when another organist and choir arrived, but soon departed. Choir director, I meant. By 2020, the disgruntled choir and bell choir were still around, just. There's no question they were having a hard time getting over the death of Bonnie and adjusting to anyone new, to the continued befuddlement of the minister. But then in March, the pandemic hit. The world went into lockdown. No one expected it would last as long as it did. Reverend James began recording himself and worship leaders for streaming on Facebook and YouTube. 1 or 2 Sunday school classes formed on Zoom on Sunday mornings. Unfortunately, not a member of our church, unfortunately, in what we would discover was a worldwide trend in all segments of society in every country, people got a little too comfortable hanging out in their PJs and drinking copious cups of coffee in front of the screen. Our church opened again with everyone masked and pews roped off so people were at least 8 feet apart. Singing was known to spread germs even further, so it took a while to begin singing again. The entire choir and bell choir never returned and drifted off to other churches. As was the case in many churches, a startling number of worshipers also failed to return. Attendance sank to an all-time low. The session and the preacher decided to hire a well-known church consultancy organization to examine the present and reimagine how the future might look. James Friesen decided that the future might look better without him and resigned, as did his wife Sarah, who had been serving as church secretary. They soon left and were followed by the sound and AV man, Bailey Dean, and then Arnold Sensen, our director of music, and finally the beloved Uma De La Rosa, our director of education. Luckily for the congregation, the intrepid and talented Cheryl stayed on and is with us to this day. Members of the, wait just a sec, let's go back a minute. Okay. Members of the congregation and the session picked up where the Friesens left off, learning how to work the sound, lock and unlock the church, turn on the lights, run the Sunday school. Stacy, the worship chairman, has kept the music going with excellent soloists, and most recently the Pink Panthers from Plant High School. Chris Bosworth and Deck Wright organized Sunday school and enlisted the marvelous Faith and so we have Angels to take over the primary school children, featuring Polly and Mackenzie. And did I show Stella? Where's Stella? Yep, and featuring Stella. And they also enlisted me to lead the Hyde Park Presbyterians. Kim Brannon, probably the best clerk of the session in the history of mankind, she's near in the blue skirt, has found supply ministers to keep the pulpit full and enlisted, may I say, shanghaied some of the elders to preach when ordained ministers are not available. 2 elders, Mary Beth Freeman and Megan Bryant, personally took it upon themselves to grow the congregation with at least 2 more tiny Christians. It cracks me up to think of the elders of 1914 imagining that a future version of their august body might have a baby shower for 2 of their own. The session, namely Guy Bryant and Brian Malik, right, there's Guy on the right. Oh, what happened? Oh, wait a minute. Is Brian back there? Oh, there, okay. There's Brian, and there's Guy. Oh, Guy. Yep, Guy. Have reimagined how the building might be repaired and used to its best capacity, bringing in revenue, yet ensuring worship and educational space for the congregation. Most amazing of all, Ann and Bruce Oran and Mark Wallace returned to the church and began to whip the office and sound, there's Bruce on the left, sound and live streaming into shape. The Kleins started a young adults ministry. Even while mostly at sea, Jane Brannon has organized Feeding Friends cooking frenzies, and as a result, friends have continued to feed friends. And the Tanners returned. And Nancy Corwin has run the personnel admissions, including End 68 Hours of Hunger, faithfully run with 2 others, I think, by Sandy Kennedy and Rebecca Orr's son, Donald. Faithful ushers and greeters and cooks like Betsy McElhaney have agreed to serve week after week. Brian Kennedy faithfully opens and locks the church and wrestles with the lighting most of the weeks of the year. Brian Alsbaugh has steadily worked elbow deep to find the sprinklers and pipes to begin to bring the grounds back up to a presentable form. And Linda Waters, well, Linda Waters does everything. And best of all, God has sent us a superb new interim minister, John Hugan, who will begin next week. We've learned many things from all of this. Despite discomfort with our previous minister, in fact, several of them, God obviously felt we needed to learn something about the kind of minister we needed, and James needed to learn something about the kind of congregation he needed. This slideshow was to show that a great many celebrations and hardships occur in the life of every church, that they can and should be endured and used for some form of growth, and that while times change, people really don't change much. Church members laugh and pray and gossip and squabble. Ministers inspire, delight, horrify, and even sin, and the church rolls right on. It just keeps doing its job of reminding us that there was only one perfect person and that he is still there to help. Now I have one final Bible verse and then a song that goes with it, hence the name of this sermon. It is called it's from Ezekiel 37, verses 1 through 14. It's called The Valley of the Dry Bones. The hand of the Lord was on me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, And I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. He asked me, Son of man, can these bones live? I said, Sovereign Lord, you alone know. He said to me, Prophesy to these bones and say to them, Dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life, and then you will know that I am the Lord. So I prophesied as I was commanded. And as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. And then he said to me, Prophesy to the breath, prophesy, Son of man, and say to it, This is what the sovereign Lord says. Come, breath from the four winds, and breathe into these slain, that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and breath entered them, and they came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast army. And then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the people of Israel. They say, Our bones are dried up, and our hope is gone. We are cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, This is what the sovereign Lord says. My people, I'm going to open your graves and bring you from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord. When you open your graves and bring you up from them, I will put my spirit in you, and you will live. And I will settle you in your own land. And then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I have done it, declares the Lord. So when it may seem like our dry old bones at Hyde Park are brittle and breaking and on the verge of being buried, that's when God comes along and starts to put us back together, and Ezekiel comes along, and it's time to sing. Okay, turn on the lights. Wait.
Ezekiel connected them dry bones. Ezekiel connected them dry bones. Ezekiel connected them dry bones. Now hear the word of the Lord. Well, your bone's connected to your foot bone. Your toe bone connected to your heel bone. Your heel bone's connected to your ankle bone. Your ankle bone's connected to your leg bone. Your leg bone's connected to your knee bone. Your foot bone's connected to your heel bone. Your thigh bone's connected to your hip bone. Your hip bone's connected to your backbone. Your backbone's connected to your shoulder bone. Your shoulder bone's connected to your neck bone. Your neck bone's connected to your head bone. You hear the word of the Lord. Them bones gonna walk around. Them bones gonna walk around. Them bones gonna walk around. Now hear the word of the Lord. Disconnect the bones, them dry bones. Disconnect the bones, them dry bones. Disconnect the bones, them dry bones. Now hear the word of the Lord. Well, your head bone's connected to your neck bone. Your neck bone's connected to your shoulder bone. Your shoulder bone's connected to your backbone. Your backbone's connected to your hip bone. Your hip bone's connected to your thigh bone. Your thigh bone's connected to your knee bone. Your knee bone's connected to your leg bone. Your leg bone's connected to your ankle bone. Your ankle bone's connected to your heel bone. Your heel bone's connected to your foot bone. Your foot bone's connected to your toe bone. Now hear the word of the Lord. Them bones gonna rise again. Them bones gonna rise again. Them bones gonna rise again. Now hear the word of the Lord. Them bones, them dry bones, them dry